This is a tough passage. This is the moment of truth for King David. And if you were here last week, or if you weren't here last week, King David has come to a crucial point in his life. Up until this particular passage or this particular place in Scripture in 2 Samuel, King David has had it good. He's done everything right. He's been a great hero of the faith. He seems to make every right decision. And then last week he made his fateful decision, which was ultimately to steal Bathsheba away from Uriah. And he tries to cover up his mistake. He makes it even worse by killing Uriah, having sent to battle and having him killed in battle. And King David plummets from his position, from his heights, from the glory that he had by being righteous. He plummets from that position, and he plummets down to reality. And that reality is that he is a sinner. And here in this particular situation, God sends a prophet Nathan, to King David to convict him of truth, to tell him what he has done, and ultimately what it will cost him. And Nathan tells this story, this very interesting story to King David. He says, David, there was this man who had a bunch of sheep, and he was rich, and there was one poor man who only had one sheep. And the rich man eventually stole what that one poor man had, and King David got really mad with righteousness. Said, this man is going to pay for this crime. And then Nathan turns around and says, you are the man. You are the man. And King David is convicted of his sin in the presence of the prophet of God. And the prediction is that King David will suffer because of this. That King David's household will suffer because of the sin. And the first reality here is that sin has consequences beyond yourself. I think many times in life we privatize or we make personal our sin, and we think that it only deals with our grief. And the truth is that sin in this world goes well above and beyond our own person. That sin has consequences that affect other people as well. Why? Because we live in a world of relationship. And when you sin, your sin has consequences. This is why criminality is so bad. Is criminality affects not only you, it affects the people that you touch, the people that you steal from, the people that you harm, the people that you hurt. It affects their lives forever. The innocent are affected when you sin. And so King David in this particular situation is convicted of his sin, and the prophet Nathan says, your household will suffer because of this. Your household will suffer for generations to come because of your sin. And King David does a very interesting thing here. He turns to Nathan and he says, I have sinned. And there is just a little bit of a redeeming quality here in the life of David. He admits his sins. In other words, he is convicted to the core himself. Not only is Nathan pointing the finger at him saying, you have done wrong, King David admits that he has done wrong. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is in standing in the presence of your own conviction, you come to realize that you have sinned. And when King David admits it, Nathan turns around and says, God has forgiven you. And all of these things that I have predicted, maybe they won't come to pass, but at the same time, there still will be consequences for what you have done. In this case, he predicts the death of the son that is about to be born. And this is the price of sin. That's what this passage is all about, is about the price of sin. Now, there's several different ways to look at this. And there's important lessons that we can learn from this. We should all know by instinct that there is a price for sin, but sometimes in this world we have forgotten that there is even sin. In this world we have forgotten that there is even anything that we can do that is wrong. You know, one of the greatest books of the 1980s is a book entitled Whatever Happened to Sin? And it's a book about the realities that in this world we have told everybody, it's okay, you do whatever you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But the truth is we live in a world where there are right things and there are wrong things. And when we do the wrong things, there is a price to pay. And coming to that reality is one of the hardest things in the world to do. It's one of the hardest things to convince yourself, to tell yourself that I have done wrong, now what do I have to do to make it right? And King David essentially comes to that point. He realizes he's standing in the presence of his conviction. He's standing in the presence of the prophet of God who has said, you have done wrong. And what does he do to reconcile it? His simple reaction is, I have sinned. He doesn't even say, what do I have to do to pay for this? He just says, I have sinned. He stands in the presence of his conviction and he accepts it. And that's one of the hardest things to do, and that's one of the things we need to learn as well. There are times in our lives when we have to say, I have sinned, and that's all we can say. We just have to accept that reality. And then we let God deal with us in terms of how he sees fit. Accepting that reality is very difficult to do, but there are lessons here that can teach us how to do this. There are lessons in this passage that can teach us on how to respond to God when we know that we have done wrong, when we've wronged our neighbors, when we've wronged our friends. When we have done wrong, there are lessons here to teach us how to respond. In this case, the first reality is do not fall in love with your own power. Do not fall in love with your own power. In this particular, I found this interesting, that phrase in there where Nathan turns around to King David and he says, "You are the man." Now I read that and my first instinct was not to think that Nathan was convicting him, but praising him. And the reason I say that is because, think about that phrase, "You are the man." And I originally had the title of the sermon, "You the man." All right? And I had it in slang on purpose because that is a phrase that is quite common in our society. I'll never forget going to the first golf tournament that I ever went to, and it was the old Nike tour. It was in the 90s. It was just starting up, and really the people on this tour, they were never going to be major pros. They were never going to be on the circuit. They were kind of up and comers, if you would. It was kind of the starter tour. People trying to make it into the PGA Tour. Most of them were never going to make it, and my local pro took us to go see this event to kind of show us what a real golf tournament looked like. And I'd never seen an up close golf tournament. I'd never seen how they operated, didn't know how they worked, and on top of that, I very rarely paid attention to golf on TV. So I didn't even know how they really worked in just from watching TV. And I found it fascinating because I loved golf, and I wanted to see how this worked out. And I went to this tournament, and I'm standing there on the first tee, and the first team's about ready to tee off. And this one particular gentleman who had a crowd, apparently he was pretty popular on a local circuit or something, I don't know, but he had a crowd of people following him. And they were all standing around the tee, and he got up and he hit, and as soon as he struck the ball, I mean, as instantaneous as this, as soon as he struck that ball, somebody in the crowd said, "You the man!" Now, we didn't know where the ball was going yet. I mean, it went up in the air. He could have shanked it, he could have pulled it, he could have done whatever he wanted to do with it. But as soon as he hit that ball, it said, "You the man!" And they started screaming that at him, and my context is they're not convicting him of anything here. There are sycophants who would praise him for anything. And then I started paying attention, and they do that all the time in golf. These people love their particular hero, and that phrase, "You the man," or "You the man," is a way of praising them regardless of their faults, regardless of their mistakes. It's a way of putting them up on a pedestal. And think about our society. How often do we do that to the heroes of this world? We put them on a pedestal, we put them up there and they say, "You're the man," and then eventually those people think they can do nothing wrong. And they do whatever they want to do in their own lifestyles, they do whatever they want to do with their own passions, and they've completely forgotten that there is a right and wrong. In other words, we in our societies, that phrase, "You are the man," we often view that not as a point of conviction, we view that as praise, and King David was perilously close to that. King David was the hero of the nation. King David was the hero of all times. He was praised by everyone in Israel. And everybody was essentially telling him, "You are the man. You are the man. You're the king. You can do whatever you want to do." But in this case, that phrase, "You are the man," was one of conviction. And that tells us something else we need to learn in these situations, is that we need to listen to people who tell the truth. We need to listen to people who tell the truth. We need to be aware of our own self-praise and praise from other people, but we also need to be aware of people who are telling us the truth. And that is difficult too, because people in positions of power, people who are in positions of great praise, often don't want to hear the truth. I mean, you ever heard the phrase, "kill the messenger"? There's a reason that phrase exists. There was a time when kings, if they received bad news, they would kill the messenger. All right, so the messenger eventually gets to a point where they don't want to deliver the message. All right, now why would I want to deliver bad news to the king if he's going to kill me? And of course, nothing really happens. The bad news is still the bad news. It's pointless to kill the messenger. But kings, when they're so wrapped up in themselves, when they're so wrapped up in their own praise, when they are the man, when they're the person, they don't want to hear bad news, and they'll do anything to reject that news. But in this particular case, you need to listen to the messenger who is speaking truth. The prophet in this case is Nathan, and he looks at King David and says, "You are the man," and he tells him the truth. "You're the one who has sinned. You're the one who has stolen from the poor man. You are the one who has made a mistake. You're the sinner." And of course, King David listens to that. That's an important lesson for us. If we have gotten to a place where we're no longer listening to truth, we are in perilous times. but we need to listen to the truth tellers. And that is not always easy. Now, as a kind of a silly illustration, we need to listen to the truth tellers. My dad and his best friend, the person I was named after, who I grew up calling Uncle Tim, they used to travel around central Illinois and going to small churches and do what they called singspirations. And singspirations where they just simply got together, they got a piano, and they sang the favorite hymns of the church. And they do that all night long. They would stand there and say, what hymn are we going to sing now? And the person would play on the piano and they'd sing the hymn. Or they would sometimes invite people to come and bring their instruments, and they would have a special. People would play, just an impromptu concert, if you will. And these were singspirations. The whole worship service was just singing. That's what they called them. And they were usually fun-filled. And then afterwards they would have some kind of fellowship. And it was a good time for everybody. And of course, as the young child, my dad drugged me to these things. All right, and a lot of times I wasn't really into that kind of music, and so I had to sit in the back, and I had to sit there, and I usually sat with other children who were drugged to this inspiration as well. We'd sit back, and we didn't have any technology at the time. We had to draw cars or draw on pieces of paper or the backs of the bulletins or whatever we could find, and that's how we would entertain ourselves. Well, one of these inspirations, they made a call for, does anybody have a solo they would like to share? Now, this is putting yourself at risk because you never know who's going to stand up and say, I have a solo, and you don't know their talent level. And in this particular case, a gentleman stood up and he said, I would like to perform, and I would like to perform my favorite hymn. Now, I do not remember what the name of the hymn is, but I remember everybody flipping in the hymn book, and I could hear the collective gasp because apparently there were 12 verses to this particular hymn, and he's going to sing it, and he said, I typically like to sing the entire hymn, but in this case, I'll only sing the 12 verses as printed. And everybody thought, oh no. And he stood up, and to say off key is inaccurate. Not anywhere close is probably more accurate. And he began to wail in this particular situation. Now, this is a situation where you don't want to make anybody feel bad. My father and my Uncle Tim are sitting there. They're in charge of this, and they don't want to get the hook and pull him off the stage. But he sounds terrible. And what's worse is he was growing deaf. And not only could he not hear himself, he could not hear the accompanist. And so he started to sing ahead of the person playing the piano, and the person playing the piano was desperately trying to catch up to the person singing. So this sounded terrible. Now, again, in the back pew was myself and several other children who were all usually not paying attention, but we were catching on that this was bad. I mean, this was really bad. And about somewhere in the 7th verse, one of my fellow friends, one of my fellow youths, just wailed out into the entire congregation, not even quietly, and said, oh, shut up! right in the middle of all that. And that slowly died off in the verse, and the gentleman kind of ashamedly walked back to his pew. And I'll never forget that because the poor child didn't get in trouble. Now, he got in trouble from his parents for saying you shouldn't say that out loud, etc. like this, but the reality is he didn't say anything that anybody else wasn't thinking in the audience at that particular time. He was the truth teller at that particular moment. And that's hard to do because everybody wants to be polite. Everybody wants to be nice. Everybody wants to, kind of convince themselves to social conventions. Now, again, you want to be, social convention says you don't yell out in the middle of a church service for somebody to shut up. All right? You don't do that. And you need to understand and learn that lesson. But at the same time, there needs to be people who are honest and express what the reality is. The reality is he shouldn't have been singing. It was well beyond him at this particular point in time. He didn't need to be up there at that particular period of time. Everybody was thinking it. This kid had the courage and the guts to say it. And we know this to be true. If you are in a situation where you are afraid to tell your boss because of their position of power the truth, then you're actually doing more harm to the corporation or to the company than you really think or understand. If you're afraid to tell your direct superior what is wrong with this particular situation, then you're doing harm. You're not telling the truth. And we get in those positions all the time. We are afraid to tell the truth because of social convention, because of the power that person has. But in this case, Nathan, as a prophet of God, is not afraid to tell the king that he has sinned. And as a direct result, David becomes convinced and convicted of his sin. And that is a good thing. That is a good thing. People who tell us the truth, we need them in our lives. We have to be open to them, and we have to welcome them in our lives. We can't simply reject them. But the second part of that is that people in positions of power also have to be willing to accept the truth. And that's what I was talking about earlier. King David hears this message, he lets Nathan speak, and then his reaction is, I have sinned in presence of God. We have to be willing to listen to the truth, and we have to be willing to accept the truth. And this is one of the hardest things to do in Christianity because it involves the word conviction. And conviction is standing in the presence and accepting, standing in the presence of truth and accepting its realities, which is not always easy. We live in a world, and I was talking about this in Sunday school this morning. We live in a world where we're sold that being happy is the ultimate extreme of life. Where as long as you're happy, everything's okay. And think about how we are marketed in this world. Everybody is trying to sell us something that will make us happy. And it doesn't matter what they're selling us. That product will make you happier than anything in the world. You know, I said this morning, it doesn't matter if it's a bottle of soap. That soap will make you the happiest person alive. You go out and you buy this product, and you'll be happier than anybody else. And that's the way we're marketed. Everything is sold to us that way. If you go to a particular restaurant, that restaurant will make you happy. If you go buy a particular food item, that food item will make you happy. If you go to a certain college, that college will make you happy. Everybody's trying to sell you something. Everybody is trying to get you to buy something or is trying to get you to participate in a particular service. And they sell you, they market to you that this will make you happy. But the truth is that sometimes we need to embrace the things of this world that will not make us happy because they are simply truthful. We live in a world where there is darkness, where there is sin, and we had better become aware of those realities. We had better become aware of the realities that sometimes it is better to serve than to be served. Life is not about just making you happy. Life is about learning to be able to sacrifice as well. And I said this morning in Sunday school, Jesus didn't die on the cross because it made him happy. He died on the cross because that's what needed to be done. And the truth is that the world had come to a place of darkness. And Jesus came to the world to save sinners. That's what the truth was, and that's what the world needed. It didn't need happiness. Although there is abundant joy in that truth, and joy is different than happiness. Although there is abundant joy in embracing the truth and realizing that we are sinners, there is ultimate joy in conviction if we will accept it. Even though that is all true, we also need to realize that life is not just about being happy and go lucky all the time. Life is about accepting truth as it is. And in this case, the truth was he had sinned, and he embraced that reality. Again, this is hard because nobody wants to admit that they're sinners. Nobody wants to embrace their darkness. But if you're going to overcome that, if you're going to overcome that sin, you have to admit it in the first place. Many of you are familiar with at least the cliche of the 12-step program. And that has been a highly effective program in the history of the United States in terms of sociology and social programs. That idea of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program. But a key element in that entire program is admitting the truth. Admitting the truth. For that entire system to work, you have to admit the truth. And in this case, David admits that he is a sinner and he's done wrong. And we need to learn from that as well. Where have we sinned? And rather than hiding it, rather than running from it, rather than trying to cover it up as King David did, we need to listen to the truth tellers, embrace the truth, and admit the fact. Now, next week, there's more to it than just that. You have to realize there are consequences to your sin whether you admit it or not. And on top of that, you ultimately have to be willing to do what is necessary to reconcile this world with your sin. But for now, it is important for us to just simply realize we have to be willing to embrace the truth, whatever it is. No matter how bad it is, no matter what we've done wrong, we can embrace the truth, and that is the first step towards repentance and recovery in our spirits. King David is at a crucial moment in his life. And the prophet predicts if he doesn't repent, if he doesn't change, it will bring calamity not only on himself, but the entire nation. His entire household will suffer as a direct result. And King David does something very interesting. He takes the first step back towards righteousness by saying, I have sinned. He's the man. But that is a dangerous position to be in. And how does he deal with it? He turns around and he says, yeah, I'm the man, I'm also a sinner. And that truth alone saves him and his household. Let us bow our heads in a word of prayer.